Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Debbie Tidwell, and I'm the State Lead for the Ohio PTA Grant Committee from Reports to Results and a past state president. I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight for our town hall, What is Equity, and why does it really matter in today's school environment? Tonight's the second of 3 town halls that we've been planning, and we've had experts who share their knowledge and relevant information to help educate, engage, and inspire parents to be included in the decisions being made at their schools that impact the education and well-being of their children. Our hosts are Jackie Arndt, our Ohio PTA President-elect, Lisa Mack, our past state president and current National PTA Board representative, and also members of our grant committee. Later on, President-elect Arndt will be providing more information about our grant work. First order of business is a little housekeeping about the format. Our attendee chat function has been disabled for tonight's town hall. We will be dropping in links to resources and information throughout the discussion in the chat feature. The first link we've shared will allow attendees to see a live script for all discussion, and this accommodation is similar to closed captioning, but will only be seen by those who click on the link. In lieu of chat, we are inviting you to use the question and answer feature to post your questions, and you will be able to see all questions posted by the attendees. Please remember that we anticipate that we may not be able to get to all the questions posted, but we will certainly try. We have several committee members who will monitor the questions and will bring them forward for our panel to answer. Before we get started, we'd like to take a quick temperature poll of our audience. Lisa? Thank you. So have you experienced an equity issue in your school district? We'll leave it up for a few minutes to see. All right, so yes, overwhelmingly, we've had 91% people who have experienced an inequity issue in their school district. Thank you, Lisa. At this time, I'd like to introduce Ohio PTA President-elect Jackie Arndt.
Oh, hello. Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jackie Arndt. I am the partnership lead for this grant work, and I am currently the Ohio PTA President-elect. I live in Northeast Ohio. I'm a college professor, a school district, and a career tech board member, and a proud mom of 4 public school graduates, all college graduates, who had very different pathways to their academic success. We are thrilled to have so many people joining us this evening for our second town hall with our esteemed panel of education leaders. Hopefully many of you were able to be on our first town hall when we had a great discussion about COVID's impact on schools with Ohio Superintendent of Public Instruction, Paulo De Maria. PTA's mission is to make every child's potential a reality by empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. Here at Ohio PTA, our goal is to bring resources to our units, councils, and members. Since early 2019, we have been working on a grant from National PTA focusing on state report cards and data. We want parents to understand how education data is used to assist with school curriculum decisions that guide local teaching and learning strategies. Also, data drive school improvements, thus leading to greater academic success for all children. Ultimately, education data should be used as an important tool guiding parents to the best decisions for their child's education. With the current pandemic, our grant work has been paused for a few months as we've all been adjusting to our new normal. We decided to refocus our efforts as the inequalities experienced by families and some school districts have come to light. Right now, we feel that it's important to focus on how our state is going to move forward and how we address the inequities and educational concerns to ensure that our children are educationally successful, healthy, and safe. With all this in mind, Ohio PTA continues to work with local, state, and federal education leaders to update our membership and engage in timely conversations. Ohio PTA also continues to provide relevant information on our various social media platforms through Member Hub and on our website. Also, please find some time to visit the National PTA website for some great resources, which include PTA's position statement on reopening schools, questions to ask local school leaders on school closures and reopening, family engagement, PTA membership, how to best advocate for your child, and much, much more. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Lisa Mack, an Ohio PTA past president and current member of National PTA Board of Directors. Lisa.
Thank you, Jackie. Tonight we are tackling a very important and critical topic, equity. We are in an unprecedented time with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has exposed and amplified issues of equity more now than ever. While we are relying so much on technology to learn, meet, and work, there are some who don't even have the devices and/or internet to support their needs. Food insecurity is a huge issue. We're seeing that 1/3 of the families being served by food banks are first-timers who are finding themselves in a place that they've never been before. With the reopening of schools, we are seeing a glaring disparity between resources that our school districts have available to them, a lot based on zip code. There are questions about how homeless, special needs, English language learner, and gifted families will be surfaced. How will discipline issues be addressed? These are some of the issues that will be tackled during tonight's conversation about equity. National PTA recognizes the disparity that students, families, and educators experience that impacts children's abilities to reach their full potential, and recently adopted definitions and beliefs of diversity, equity, and inclusion. National PTA's commitment to equity addresses fairness in resources, opportunities, and outcomes. It states that equity moves beyond an equal across the board approach to recognize and address bias and privilege while understanding and attending to specific individual and community needs. It goes on to say that we must champion fair, just, and data-informed approaches to children's educational success, health, and well-being. We must prioritize solutions that work for a diverse range of children and families, especially those underrepresented and/or marginalized in our communities, and we must hold all stakeholders accountable. The full version of National PTA's commitment brief can be accessed through the link in the chat box. As part of the preparation for tonight's town hall, each panelist was asked to give a definition of equity. You will see their definitions as they are sharing with us tonight. It was quite interesting that there was so much commonality across their definitions, which is reflected in the word cloud that you're viewing. Each emphasized that access, opportunities, resources, and support are key to equity. They share that equity is a verb, an approach, a process. The panelists emphasized that there has to be a component of value, care, and honor extended to our children and families. There has to be a removal of barriers, a removal of predictability of failure and success, and of injustice. And that there must be a recognition and correction of imbalances, unequal starting places, favoritism, and advantages so that each and every child can succeed and is able to reach his or her full potential. I'm excited tonight about tonight's power-packed panel. Each panelist will first share their thoughts with us on tonight's topic. What is equity and why does it really matter in today's school environment? Then each will answer a tailored question, and following, we will open up the town hall to have the panelists answer questions from our attendees. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Deborah Delisle. Deb Delisle is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Alliance for Excellent Education, All for Ed, a Washington, D.C. based national policy, practice, and advocacy organization. She previously served at the U.S. Department of Education as Assistant Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Education. We're proud to say that President Delisle has an Ohio connection, having served as Ohio State Superintendent and previous to that as a superintendent for the Cleveland Heights University Heights School District. Thank you for being with us tonight, President Delisle.
Oh, thank you so much. And before I begin, can I just do one thing and have people respond like, OH?
I-O.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I-O.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me be a part of this important topic and conversation. You know, when I was saying OH and then I-O, if I know if there's even one Ohioan in the audience, I always say that because having spent 28 years of my career in Ohio, some of my favorite and finest colleagues are still in Ohio, and Eric Gordon certainly is one of them. If I got to know you better, Charlie and Justin, I'm sure I would count you in my top grouping as well. Eric and I go way back I think many roles ago, Eric. So, you know, I spent 28 years in Ohio, and when I was able to, whether to go to Columbus and then eventually to the federal office under President Obama and serve as the Assistant Secretary for Elementary and Secondary Education, you can imagine that I was able to see just such a wide, vast array of educational opportunities for kids. And I always entered into schools with one question, which is this school good enough for my own child? Because if the answer to that is no, and we continue to allow that school to be okay for other people's kids, that's exactly at the root of what we talk about when we talk about equity. And I want to remind us that equity is really mired in social justice, and equity does not equate to equal, not providing every kid with the same opportunities, but providing the supports and structures and opportunities to excel at high levels for all kids. And that will differ because we have wide variability of experiences of kids and youth coming into our schools. You know, I have to just share with you that tonight I'll share like from the national perspective, but I want to frame my comments now and then in addressing my question around a critical point. The pandemic did not create inequity. They didn't create issues of equity. But what it did, and it continues to do so, is to shed a laser beam, shed the very pointed laser beam on an already existing problem. And if there's one good possible outcome from this pandemic, is that we recognize and we start to do something about the inequity that exists in our country. I have long said we know what to do. We don't need one more white paper. We don't need another research report. We simply need the urgency to attack this problem head on. And one of my fears is in this situation is that I've heard people so often across the country say, well, let's just get back to normal. Well, I just really want to remind people that normal before the COVID-19 hit, that normal didn't work for a whole bunch of kids. So maintaining the status quo and going back to that provides us with just doing more of the same. So we know back in March, over 55 million kids were overnight suddenly transitioned into this issue. So I really want to talk from the equity standpoint about what this overnight transition for school districts and schools means, because that transition to home-based remote learning happened like that. And you mentioned the fact that some kids don't have the devices, some kids don't have the home equity, the home internet high-speed connectivity that's really critical. So two of the things our organization focuses on is, one is policies and one is programs. So one of the things that we've been working on extensively, and hopefully Eric and Charlie and Justin can relate to this, is really working hard to change the formula for E-rate and its connectivity. And honestly, we within 24 hours, we had over 17,000 educators sign on to a letter that went to the FCC, and they didn't act on it. They just need to change one word to be sure that we can get connectivity to every home, and that's to remove the word classroom from the law. We are now redefining classroom as anywhere learning, right? At home and et cetera. And the second thing we work on is our program area. And one of our primary programs is Future Ready Schools. You can just futureready.org and you can get more information. We're in 40,000 schools. And one of our primary issues around that is being sure that teachers, principals have action plans dedicated to digital learning. And I can share with you that when the rapid transition occurred to digital learning almost overnight, those folks who had been engaged in that work already said it really wasn't such a hard action step for us to take. We knew what to do, we had a plan, and off we went. So in terms of equity, I just really want to remind folks that this 21st century learning, soon to be 22nd century learning, absolutely, without a doubt, requires technology and the internet. we can't leave this to chance. We can't expect or assume that people have that connectivity. And I'm going to point you to a report and a study that we recently conducted and completed about 30 days ago. A lot of the data on internet connectivity and home connections and digital devices was about 3 to 4 years old. So we ended up with the National Urban League and Unidos US, along with a couple of other civil rights organizations, commissioned a study. And it's called Students of Color Caught in the Homework Gap. And if you go to allfored.org, all4.org, .org, you'll find the homework gap there. And this is beyond a homework gap. But one of the things I really want to point out in our conversation around equity is that most people relate this issue of connectivity and digital devices to a socioeconomic issue. And let me share with you, because the report indicates by state how many kids don't have home internet access, for example. So I'm just going to give you Ohio stats because this was kind of a shock to us. The number of kids without high-speed home internet access in Ohio is 580,000 kids. Now, some parents will rely and think, well, I have a smartphone. I can use that for my kids' homework. You cannot use that for the kinds of connectivity and learning opportunities that we want to provide to our students. You're not going to be able to do algebraic equations in ways that are really meaningful. So at all income levels, it's 580,000. Below $25,000 income level in the house, as you would expect, it's a significant amount, 190,000 kids. Between $25,000 and $50,000 in the home in Ohio, 190,000 kids. But here's what startled us. $50,000 to $75,000 income in the home, 90,000 kids without connectivity. $75,000 to $150,000 in the home, 122,000 kids without high-speed internet connectivity. Above $150,000, 30,000 kids without high-speed connectivity. The results for kids without a computer are a little bit more promising, but the reality is that we cannot assume that every kid has access. And access for me is the most significant word that we can actually plays itself out in this whole idea of equity, right? And school districts can help, certainly, but we have to remember we have widely variable capacity in our families and school systems. What I saw happening around this country, and these are with even colleagues of mine who are in similar positions that I have, who are taking 2 and 3 days off to figure out, how do I get my kids organized? They're having color-coded charts about when somebody had to log on, virtually in sort of the virtual in-person connectivity to a teacher, whatever. And some of the things that I was seeing were just mind-boggling. And I'm not going to pretend, I'm not in the superintendency anymore. And I hated calling off snow days. This would even be worse on top of that. But when I thought about it, I had a colleague who said her 6th grader had to log in on Monday at 8:29 a.m. and then on Tuesday at 11:10 a.m. and then on Wednesday at 1:15 p.m. And she was going crazy over this, trying to organize her own schedule. Now, granted, she has a professional position, which allows her a lot of flexibility, but parents don't have that. I have colleagues who drove 24 hours to get to Texas so their parents can take care of their 2- and 5-year-old, and those two partners, and mom and dad, could actually get their jobs done. So we have this wide variability of accessibility, and even the ability or opportunity. I've had people who say, I don't know what's the right developmental needs of our kids. Should my kindergartner stay on for 10 minutes? Should they stay on for 1 hour? So we've got to be very proactive in understanding what are the developmental needs. And as much as some people don't want me to say this, I will say that remote learning is not the same as being in the classroom. It's just not. You don't have the same kinds of relationships that occur. And I'll speak a little bit later about some of the potential problems long-term that we have. But what's really concerning me is that we act quickly and we act very thoughtfully and proactively to address this whole issue of access and opportunities, the kinds that we would want for our own kids. Thank you.
Thank you, President Delisle. Our next panelist is Eric Gordon. Mr. Gordon was appointed Chief Executive Officer of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District in June 2011 after serving as the district's Chief Academic Officer for 4 years. He is responsible for the leadership and daily management of Cleveland's 37,000 student school district. Now in his 9th year as CEO, Mr. Gordon is the longest serving superintendent of the Cleveland Public Schools in over 40 years. He is also the immediate past chair of the Council of Great City Schools, a coalition of 76 of the nation's largest urban public school systems dedicated to educational improvement. CEO Gordon.
Thank you so much for having me this evening. Deb Delisle opened with saying about our long working relationship and friendship over the years. I can very easily not only vouch for her superior leadership, but also for my colleagues, Dr. Smilek and Superintendent Jennings, who I also know very well. You have really, for the participants today, just a top-notch group of leaders in my colleagues that are going to talk through these challenges today. I actually want to start with my definition, which is on the screen, but I want to lift out and really point out a couple of things that I hope you'll listen for as we continue the dialogue tonight. So equity is action. It is what we do or what we stop doing that together work to remove predictability of success or failure based on race or other cultural or social issues. And Deb mentioned particularly available resources and supports. I want to lift up care also. It is about our mindset, our beliefs, our values, that it makes us put the right amount of the extra care and effort in place to create a more equal playing field. Equity works in service of equality, and a lot of us have started to say they're kind of mutually disconnected. And in fact, the goal is a fair, just, good playing field for every person. And equity is the tool or the action or the way we, again, act or don't act that helps us get there. And I really want you to think about those actions we take or those actions we stop taking, because we so often focus on what we should do, but we don't examine what we are doing to see what we should stop doing. I also want to build on Deb's comments about the inequities that COVID-19 has laid bare. Deb is exactly right, and we all know it, that these inequities are not new. Cleveland has the highest childhood poverty in this country. Detroit is number 2. And we have the dubious distinction of battling back and forth every time the census updates to see who underserves children more. We are the 4th worst connected city in the country when it comes to internet and digital divide. 40% of my families do not have high-speed, reliable internet in their home. You heard Deb talk some about this. Even worse, the infrastructure in the city is so poor that when families started getting on the internet with 2 or 3 children and mom, dad, or caregiver, the internet wasn't strong enough to support those families. So people who thought they had high-speed, reliable internet found out that they did not. And unlike the study that Deb cited about devices, 2/3 of my students did not have a device to connect to that internet, even if they had it. And those inequities are not new. And I would challenge us even more than Deb did, that COVID didn't shine a light on them. We knew they were there, but too many people pretended that they couldn't see them. And what COVID did was make it impossible to look away. And I think that's a really important distinction. We have to call ourselves and hold ourselves responsible as communities. We knew those inequities were there, but as a country, we did a good job of finding ways to look the other way and pretend we didn't. And COVID took that away from us. And hopefully, if one good thing comes out of the coronavirus, it is exactly that we can't look away. I also want to take just a moment and lift up again George Floyd. And George Floyd is one of a number of just horrific, tragic killings in this country. But I want to lift this one in particular because I believe that there's something uniquely different and an opportunity for the people on this webinar tonight that was not true in the past. So first of all, I would say everybody who wrote a statement, I'm one of them. If all you do is write a statement, you have done more harm than good. Equity is a verb, it's action. And so it's what you're going to start doing and what you're going to stop doing. It's not just simply writing a statement. But I want you to consider how George Floyd's killings and the killings we've seen during COVID-19, as horrific as they are potentially different than the protests and riots that we saw in the 1960s in Huff here in Cleveland, the Watts riots in LA in 1970s, in the Rodney King killing and beating in 1990s. And the difference is, and again, you heard Deb say that, in each of those cases, those of us who really value equity, particularly racial equity, had to try to change the existing system to make it more fair, just, and good. We had to work from the inside to make that system change. But COVID-19 has done something that we have not experienced in any of that time. It blew up our system, and we cannot go back to it right now, even if we want to. And I'm with Deb, and I've been saying this for anyone who will listen in my community, why would we go back there? But the difference this time is that those of us who believe in equity get to build something that is new, that is more fair, that is more just, and that is better, instead of going back to what was. So right now, most school districts can't put 25 kids in a classroom. You can't put 40 to 55 kids on a bus. You can't hold large lunches and field trips and all these other large gatherings. We'll need lots of extra time to clean and keep places safe. And students and staff won't all be able to come back to work. And I think students and parents will demand a different experience even when they can come back to school. So I think we have an opportunity. I'm a big fan of Audre Lorde. And for those of you who don't know Audre, Audre Lorde was an activist for so many issues, active in race issues, in gender issues, a big part of her work, in sexuality and homosexuality back in the 70s, many others. And one of her quotes is, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they'll never enable us to bring about genuine change." And I would argue that things like seat time, Carnegie units, the agrarian calendar, all of those are the master's tools. And we've always worked from inside the system to change that little by little and tinker around the edge, hoping that we'd beat the master and dismantle his house. But it's not going to. And so we are in a place now where we are able to reinvent and do better. We can do more mastery-based learning. Deb's exactly right. Remote learning does not replace good in-classroom learning. But good remote learning puts us on a path to mastery-based, individualized learning where students are moving at the pace they need to move toward a goal of learning, not making learning the variable because they only have a set 180 days, and that's when we decide that they learned enough to get a D, which does not mean that they learned enough to know the content. And so we have an opportunity to really think about how students demonstrate learning. How do they work in place-based models? How do we take advantage of partnerships and use our entire community as an ecosystem in a classroom? I also just want to point out just one last example, and it goes back to this digital divide, and I want you to listen again for the actions we took or didn't take. When COVID-19 hit, we told my community and all of Ohio, go home, stay home, get on the internet, and because we're shutting down unemployment, but you can apply online. Get on the internet because that's where you can apply for jobs. Get on the internet because that's where you can do telemedicine. We don't want you going to your doctor. We don't want you going to a hospital. Need legal service? Get on the internet. The FCC, the same FCC that won't take that one word out that Deb talked about, launched a plan that was called Keep America Connected. It didn't say Get America Connected. That's an issue of equity. So we really have to examine as we go through this tonight, and then as we go back into our workplace, those things that we do or that we fail to do and stop doing that remove the predictable barriers that can tell you by race or by zip code what's going to happen, in our case, for children. So I'm really looking forward to our dialogue today. Thank you so much for including me.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Our third panelist is Justin Jennings. Mr. Jennings was appointed as the Chief Executive Officer of Youngstown City School District in August 2019. He earned his Bachelor's of Science degree from Purdue University and would go on to earn 3 master's degrees. In addition, he received an Educational Specialist degree in leadership and is currently completing the dissertation portion for his Doctorate of Education degree in Educational Leadership at the University of Michigan. In 2020, Mr. Jennings earned his National Superintendent certification through the American Association of School Administrators. CEO Jennings.
Thank you so much. And in full disclosure, you do have to tell everybody I'm also your cousin as well, right? We just found that out as we talked.
Yes.
Justin is muted.
Can you hear me now? All right, sorry about that. I said, thank you. I said, did you, in full disclosure, I'm also your cousin. You heard that part? Or somebody muted me?
Yes.
Okay. So,
and also Boilermakers.
All right, and also a Boilermaker, absolutely. And Eric beat me to the punch. Thank you so much. It's been great. I've been here for a year as of August 1st. And it's been great to be able to work with people like Eric and Charles and just kind of learning the Ohio system the way that I should. So Eric has been a great role model for me and a great help. And as you go back, just like Eric, I want to start with my definition, and I can't take credit for this. I actually have one of my cousins who is she's on the line right now. She is the equity and diversity coordinator for a bank in Michigan, and this is what she does all the time. And we talk every Sunday about this and things like this, but really hitting this, but looking at the last part. Equity is a process that begins with acknowledging that unequal starting place and continue to correct and address the imbalance. And I think that's something that we really have to focus on. And I'm going to be a little redundant because I think we all kind of have the same thing that we want to say. But when we live in a society, and especially in education, where your zip code determines your quality of education, we're going to get what we keep getting until we stand up and we fight and do something different. In my realm and in my area, I like to use a term called educational poverty. And I know Eric has probably heard this before because I've said it. And often when people think of the word poverty, they often stop with money. They often stop with finance. But when I think of educational poverty and I think of then equity, I think I use the term more of the low expectation, because that's what happens when our scholars go into their classrooms, when they go into buildings, even our parents, the community, they have a level of low expectation, and that's something that we have to address. I mean, recently my mom passed away about 8 years ago, and I had an opportunity. One of the first books that I read after she passed, it was a book called The Warmth of Other Suns. It's by Isabella Wilkerson. She has a new book out. You can grab it if you can. But there was a part in the book that stood out for me, because one day I was reading the book and my dad and I were driving back and forth, and I used to go pick my dad up because just trying to keep him busy because my mom had passed away. And I looked over and I saw my dad crying, and I didn't understand why he was crying. And so I said, "Dad, you all right?" I'm thinking he's crying because, mom's gone. He's like, "No, this is how I grew up. I grew up in the Jim Crow South. I grew up driving. I grew up in a place where when in the white schools, when they were done with their books, they would mark them up and they would throw them in the trash. And we would have to get on in the truck with our teacher, and we would have to go pick those books up because those were the books that we were using." And if you think about right now, we're almost at the same place. Brown versus the Board of Education is almost non-existent anymore. You can't see it. There's hardly any diversity in our schools anymore. And that's something that we already know. We can call it white flight, we can call it whatever we want to, but it's showing the inequities that we have. I mean, even right now, before we got on, we talked about getting computers. I mean, the way that we're doing things, it's the way that it's always been, and it's not okay. And I know that Eric said this too, but it's been so disheartening as an African-American male when I hear people say, "Well, I just want to get back things back to normal like they were before. Well, guess what? They weren't right before. And Eric also said so well, we have an opportunity that we've never had before. We have momentum that we've never had before in the social justice realm. And that's not just for education, but that's for everything. The things that we've been missing out on, we have the opportunity to address those things before we lose the momentum. Because what normally happens in America and in education, we go to the next best thing. And then we forget about the progress that we made or we wanted to make, but we just go to the next best thing, and whatever's cheaper or whatever is this new buzzword, that's what we're doing. We wanted to address devices, and we want to address equity in a different way. And another conversation, I'm giving Eric all the praise. You have to give me $1 when we get done. But giving Eric, we had a conversation about internet access, and Eric and I both share the sentiment. I don't feel comfortable providing a utility for a family, but that's the only way we're going to get equity, because that access, like Deb said, the access is just not there. So in our district, what we're doing to address the equity is, if we made sure that every family who did not have hardwired access, we made sure if they had the ability to have it in their house, they do. And every family that does not have that ability, or they can't have it in their house, we have a hotspot for every single student. So it's not one hotspot for a household, because we already know if you got 3 kids and you're at home with your kids and you're working and they're working, that hotspot's not going to work. And that's something that we shouldn't have to do. This should be something that's available for everybody, and it has to be continually available in order for us to make sure that we have that equity. And somebody also hit on, education is a social justice topic, and we have to fix that. And I always go back and I say this: if you look at the Constitution, education is not a right. It's not a right, and nobody addresses that. It's never been a right for anybody to get educated. And our framers, everybody wasn't supposed to be educated. And that's not something that's often addressed. But the other piece we have to address is how we educate our kids and what we're doing to do that. Because everybody's not going to be in front of a book. We don't need a world full of doctors and lawyers. We need people who have skills. I need people who can fix my sink. I need people who can fix a car. But we don't think about that. We want all of our kids to be college ready. And there's nothing wrong with having those high expectations for our scholars. But we also have to give them the opportunity to develop skills that we don't give them, because often it's pigeonholed into this taking this test, which we already know is culturally biased in most cases. And when we have these discussions, one of the things that I always talk about is we have to learn to take race out of this discussion sometimes, so we can have a pure discussion, and then we can bring it back in, and people should be uncomfortable. If we're not doing the right thing, you should be uncomfortable having that conversation. But we have to take it out, because it becomes taboo, and it takes us away from our topic that we need to do, and that's educate our scholars. So that's something else. And our last thing, and I think somebody hit this before, remote learning. It's not ideal, but it's necessary right now. And one of the things we're doing differently in our district is we're not having 5 days of our scholars on the computer. We're doing it for all you basketball people. We're doing it like a 2-1-2 zone. That's what I call it, but a 2-1-2. So we have 2 days of instruction, and then we have a day of enrichment. So that's where we're going to enrich our arts and do different things like that, and then have a 1-to-1. So now our scholars have the opportunity to have a 1-to-1 time with their teacher, and then have 2 more days of instruction. Because I mean, I'm right now, I'm 46 years old, and I can't imagine. I work on my computer all day, and I get fatigued doing this so quick. I can't imagine a young mind trying to be online for 5 hours to engulf all these things. They're not going to retain that information. So we have to figure out ways to do things different, but we also have to, at that same time, we have to figure out a way to fix a broken system, because it's not fair that Mr. Gordon has to be in the most impoverished district in the state and in the country, and not have the resources that he needs. Those are the things that has to happen. The way we fund schools is not right. It's not fair, and it's an inequitable thing. And we can, and the way it is now, if you live in this zip code, this is how your school is going to be funding. This is your quality of education. And this is not an indictment against a principal, a superintendent, or a teacher. This is an indictment against the system that we created, and we've allowed to keep going. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, our final panelist is Dr. Charles Smilek. Dr. Smilek began his tenure as the superintendent of the Parma City School District on August 1st, 2018. Dr. Smilek came to the Parma schools after serving as superintendent in the Euclid City District from 2016 to 2018. Dr. Smilek earned his bachelor's degree from Ohio State University. He then earned his Master of Art in Teaching degree from Kent State University and later earned his PhD in Educational Leadership from Kent State University. Dr. Smilek.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this esteemed panel. Can I speak to whoever came up with this speaking order, though? Because these folks are hard to follow. Eric is just a regional leader and really a great mentor, and has provided so much, not only in his own district, but really throughout our first ring. He's always involved. Justin, I look forward to meeting you. Personally, I'm sorry that I haven't had the opportunity to do so. And Deb, I'm sitting right in your old backyard here. I'm in Shaker Heights, and you're still a legend in these parts. So this is really an honor for me to be a part of this group. You see in front of you the statement that we developed last year for a committee that we actually referred to as Embrace All. And this committee, and we've talked a lot about income, but really in terms of equity, it's more than just socioeconomic demographics. The challenge we faced in our Parma School District was making sure that we were providing an equitable experience for transgender students, actually. We, at the end of the 2018-19 school year, had a transgender student die in a horrifically violent, really self-destructive manner, and really look back at that student's experience and realize that we had some real shortcomings as a school district. By and large, our teachers accepted and embraced this young man's decision and young man's lifestyle, but there were aspects that were not so warm to him, and really caused some ongoing difficulty in having him navigate certainly his experiences throughout our school district. And that's a piece of what I'll come back to in a few minutes, is that inequity between how our administration and how our staff sometimes reacts that really causes that domino effect. But I want to talk first more about how we addressed it. And we said, we really want to hear from kids. We want to hear from kids about what are your experiences in our school district, and how can we make sure that all of our students really do have equal access, that really do have equal opportunity in our schools. And so we've decided to survey students. We're having Embrace All student panels that can help about, making sure that their school is going to be more inclusive. We have training for our staff from the Northeast Ohio Diversity Coalition. So we're really making a proactive effort to try to make sure that all of our settings are as equitable as possible for all different demographics that we may encounter, including students who are transgender. I want to share just one short anecdote, and this was powerful and embarrassing at the same time, and maybe powerful because it was embarrassing. When we went and spoke to a panel at one of our high schools, Valley Forge High School, one of the requests from our student panel was to make sure we had doors on the stalls of our bathrooms. How embarrassing is that? These students had nowhere to go to feel that they had any sense of privacy when they had to change for gym or change for a team activity. So embarrassingly enough, one of our action steps is actually to appoint someone to go through our school district and make sure that they are, all of our stalls have doors on them, and students have some ability to be private. Now, that's horrific to me, but it's a step to make sure that we are honoring all of our students, that we are embracing all of our students, regardless of your socioeconomic demographic, transgender status, gender orientation. We want to make sure that you are going to have a positive experience in our school district, so that when you come out, all of the hopes and the dreams that you may have are still right within your realm. The second focus that we always take, and we all know these studies, we all know the studies that show that a bad teacher is going to have effects on a student for a couple of years. We know the studies that say that a student's teacher is really 2 or 3 times more impactful than really any other factor that they're going to come to us from or really experience within our schools. We know the studies that talk about how a good teacher can inspire a child and make a difference in terms of lifetime earnings and degrees conferred. So a large part of what we always focus on, because I really believe that when you come down to that micro level, what is that experience in the classroom? And you know, we've talked a lot about COVID, and I agree with all of my predecessors' comments about, you know, equity and internet access and connectivity and hotspots, and we're doing all of those things. But if you also think back to the spring, we had students who were on Zoom every single day with their teachers, and their teachers are engaging them, and they're going through, you know, assignments and classroom discussions. And then at the same time, because we were not ready, and we can see that we were not ready for what we endured in March through May, we went into crisis teaching. And so some students experienced simply a posting of assignments on Monday. Well, we hope that it gets done by Friday. We cannot accept that. So what we worked on all summer was making sure that we have a floor for our professional staff, a floor of class meetings, a floor of class assignments, a floor of active engagement between teachers and students, because while all of these things are critically important, and those can't happen without connectivity, but that next step is making sure that all of our teachers are equally engaging to our students. We know that when you sit in a classroom and you have a teacher that provides that warmth, provides that experience, nurtures that relationship, looks for those aha moments, that those are the transformational moments of students' career. So we have to make sure that we're creating structures, then making sure that we're providing the professional development for the folks that just can't do that. Think back to our spring. We had folks that were internet savvy and ready to go, as we've referred to earlier on the phone call. We had other folks that, to them, they were scanning and emailing, you know, documents and lists of assignments. That can't continue to happen. That itself is not an equitable experience. And when you have that type of gap between the haves and the have-nots, not in type of income, in terms of income, but in terms of instruction, those gaps are only going to exacerbate. So I've always believed, and we've always preached in our district, clarify what you want. So we worked on this summer to make sure that we would clarify for teachers, here's our structure, here's our very clearly defined modes of instruction. We don't have 78 different tools, because our parents were concerned about that too. They can't go 78 different places with 78 different logins for their 3 children. We have 4, all consolidated into a Google Classroom. We're going to clarify what we expect from our teachers. We're going to reinforce it with our professional development, with our staff meeting, with our teacher-based team meetings. Then we're going to monitor it. Our teachers have to be cognizant of the fact that, yeah, we are going to be in their classrooms. Our administrators are going to spend time just as they would if in a brick or mortar building, where we tell those principals all the time, the most important part of your job is to monitor instruction, be in those classrooms. And yes, now they're virtual classrooms, but the effect is the same. Those principals will have our Google Classroom logins, and they'll be in there to make sure that we do have that active engagement. And then finally, celebrate. And we probably do too little of that in our profession and really our society in general, especially right now. Everybody's at a 10, right? Everybody has an opinion of how kids should go to school and how they should learn and what should happen. And you should open now and you should play football now, but don't play soccer. We're all going through a daily routine of trying to make some very difficult decisions. We have to make sure we celebrate our educators and our students, because our students have endured hardships that we probably didn't foresee. And I agree that those hardships already existed, but COVID has shined a light on them. We want to make sure that we are able to provide that celebration too, because everybody right now is enduring many more variables than they ever had to navigate. So I look forward to the continued conversation, and just wanted to share a little bit about where we're coming from in Parma.
Thank you very much. We have crafted a question for each panelist. Each question will be posted in the chat box so that you can follow along. We'll allot 2 minutes for each response, and we'll go in the same order. President Delisle, there are many concerns being raised about the socio-emotional impact that this pandemic is having on our children and families. I just met with a group of school leaders last Friday, and they are gravely concerned about their scholars' social, emotional, and mental health well-being. You lead a nationwide organization, so we're hoping you can give a broader perspective, looking through the lens of equity. What are the long-term concerns that you anticipate being exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis that you feel will impact students and families?
Thank you so much. It's a great question. And as I mentioned before, I'll frame this from not only what I saw as an Assistant Secretary of Education in the U.S. Department, but also what I hear every day in our interactions with superintendents and building principals and teachers as well. So classify these as a 5+1. One of which is the academic and creative stagnation. You know, the digital learning divide we know is more pronounced than ever before. Kids' creativity is sparked by interacting others who challenge their thinking. How does that occur? How does it come across through remote learning or in classrooms that must limit close proximity is yet to be seen. And that may in fact have long-term repercussions. Kids not in clubs anymore, for example. Included in the long-term concerns is the impact of colleague-to-colleague interaction. I don't know how my colleagues on this panel if they have suffered any losses within their learning communities. But New York City, for example, has lost close to 100 educators. Can you imagine coming eventually back when you've not had an opportunity to mourn the teacher who worked next to you or the administrative assistant? The second you alluded to, and that's the impact of social isolation and the lack of connections and interpersonal skills development. We're social beings by nature. I'm a hugger by nature. So it's very difficult for me to see friends or whatever and not be able to do this. I know Eric and I gave one before, but it's hard. How do you teach kids how to form relationships and learn how to deal with others in isolation? And for younger students below the age of maybe grade level about 5 or 6, they do not understand why they can't go to their fencing club. They don't understand why they can't go play. So we see these pods being created, kind of an interesting facet, but those pods generally are for higher income families, again, creating more inequity. I'll be rushing through this: an increase in opportunity gaps, a lack of support for educators. The fourth is we don't understand right now about the economic hardships that will ensue as a result of this, both for school districts. You know, I just am really feeling for Eric and Justin and Charlie in terms of all the additional monies that have to be expended to get kids safe, to have partitions, to have sanitizers. All of that adds up, and nobody's coming from the federal or state level and saying, I'll write you a blank check to make your kids safe. So this is adding to the burden of going out to seek partnerships with folks, right? But we also have to understand that even some of our adults are facing, our educators, our support staff are facing huge economic realities. We don't know the long-term impact of that. And we usually will talk about social and emotional learning for kids, but we have the same issues going on with adults, people who have lost family members, people who are trying to comply with things. And there's an immense pressure on schools and teachers. They have to go to remote learning, remote teaching automatically, caring for the most vulnerable kids, worrying about an increase in child abuse because they're no longer in their presence and can report it, kids going hungry. I think, Lisa, you were the one who mentioned more families are new to being food deprived or, you know, food hungry. How do they support their own families though? They have their own personal lives. This is a huge dilemma, and we don't know long term. I know one of the questions, I'm going to simplify this. I know one of the questions in the Q&A asked about how to resolve this financially or whatever. We have worked on the Hill. There's a simple solution. It's not easy, but it's simple. The federal government has got to release $6.8 billion. Now that seems like a whole lot to us. I don't even know if it classifies as a line item. That's how small it is in the greater thing, in the greater budget. They have to release $6.8 billion in the next CARES Act or the next COVID-19 response in order to get every kid, every family connected and with a device, high-speed connectivity. So it's on this whole big issue around what is the federal government doing in response to what the states need and in response to what the local needs are.
Thank you. And for CEO Gordon, the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement just released results of a survey recently conducted. It found, which we're discussing quite a bit tonight, that the respondents, when asked what the family needs were for services during the pandemic, technology and connectivity topped the list, with 88% indicating that they needed greater technology and 89% a greater need for high-speed internet. And lack of technology and internet access was also noted as the two greatest barriers. The digital divide has been an overwhelming issue for so many districts. Cleveland ranks at number 4 in connectivity issues in the nation. What measures has CMSD employed to help mitigate the divide?
Yeah, so let me briefly revisit what we've done, and it's what Justin and Charlie and many of my colleagues have done. We have purchased and are deploying 27,000 devices and 13,500 hotspots that have a year-long subscription so that families can be connected, and that will serve to get us through a year. But I want to raise up two issues. One is the equity questions that have surfaced in this, and then the other is our longer response. Because everybody's out there buying devices and competing for hotspots, but I can't tell you how many people said to me, well, why don't you park buses in neighborhoods so that kids can have access to the internet? And my response to those people, who were almost always white and were on a call like this in their living room, is when you stand against a bus to have internet access, that's when I'll ask my kid to stand beside a bus to have internet access, because that's an equity question. And it was well-meaning, but you have to ask yourself what you're saying. The other thing is we have to examine the long-term solution. What do you think Justin and Charlie and I are gonna do when these hotspots are done? Are you expecting us to knock on the Delisle's door and say, the pandemic's over, I need your internet back? So we have to make this a public utility, like electricity and water. And so we are deeply investing in a partnership here in Cleveland called Digital C. It's a nonprofit that, by making us the largest purchaser, the largest customer, we're able to give them the capital they need to start expanding internet to all homes in Cleveland, including my kids' homes. And so we're paying for it, because the other thing that we saw is lots of rhetoric about free or low-cost internet for families that need it, until we screened them out because they didn't have good credit. Well, of course they didn't have good credit. That's why they didn't have internet in the first place. So we've got to take these barriers out of the way, and the district has made a commitment to be the customer. And if you are a student in our district and you get on to Digital C as we expand it, your invoice will come. It will show the $20, not $60, that it costs at a nonprofit. It will show a credit for CMSD families, and while they're with us, they will be free. And that's how we're going to get permanent utility in this community, and not temporary hotspots that people then look to us to go take back when the pandemic's over.
Thank you. These have been excellent answers. CEO Jennings, as was shared at the beginning of this town hall, the work of the Ohio PTA from Report to Results Grant Committee is to help parents understand the foundations of what education data is and why it's important, how using the data affects our schools and children, and how to think critically about how each data area can impact local education decisions around teaching and learning and improve educational equity for all students. The state issues an annual report card on the performance and demographics of each school and district in the state. You specialize in turning schools and now districts around. This strength was a factor in your being hired as CEO of the Youngstown City School District and the district's academic distress status due to data from the state report card. So how has the COVID-19 pandemic presented any challenges to reaching this turnaround goal?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely presented that, because we don't have that face-to-face instruction. So the time is, we have yet to see what's going to happen in the future. But our focus is really on how we can at least get the instruction in front of our scholars as best we can. I mean, of course, you stated we're the lowest achieving district in the state of Ohio. That's not a badge of honor at all. But our focus is really on how we can get that instruction in the classroom and improve that instruction. And it's really having conversations, and it's really having collaboration with people to understand where we need to go. I mean, if you've been watching the Youngstown saga at all, there's so many different things against, House Bill 70 or this or that. And I tell people all the time, I'm not a politician. My job is not to be a politician. My job is to make sure that our scholars learn. And this has given us the opportunity to have a discussion like we've never had before. I think I said that before, because now they're really paying attention to what's going on in the schools. And someone said before, it's not ideal. And, you know, at the end of the day, if we have to test, it wouldn't be fair for us to test, but we do have to have some sort of accountability, and people have to understand that. And I think that has been the impact. I think this more important than anything else, because now people are realizing that this is really serious. It's not a Youngstown thing, or it's not a urban school thing, or it's not an African-American community thing. It's an education thing for everybody. And I often tell people, and I always go back to, we have to be really careful when we talk about color because it's taboo. But you take Youngstown and you put me in a rural district anywhere else, and it's the same thing. You got poverty, and you have scholars who are not achieving. But because sometimes when you're in an urban school district, it's just magnified because you have the newspapers, you have different things there. But the lack of access and those different things are no different in Youngstown or Cleveland as they are in any rural area in Ohio or anywhere in the country.
Thank you. And Dr. Smilek, going back to education data, we understand that knowledge and information are powerful tools for affecting change. This education data is gained through state testing. Report cards also provide additional context and information about a school district, a school or a district. The Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, requires that report cards include information on a variety of areas, including demographics and school environment. You share that you feel as though there's an issue with equity with state testing and that it's been used to segregate communities. Can you please expand on that for us?
Yeah, I can. You know, I really view this similar. I recently viewed a short video on systemic racism and how, you know, if you look back into even the 1940s and the 1950s, how we moved businesses further and further away from inner cities on these new things called interstates, and then wondered why the percentage of unemployment or poverty in inner cities exploded. Well, the jobs essentially, you know, had continued to move in Cleveland. It's either further east or further west. In any other city, it might be north or south. But when you look at that dynamic, it's not hard to draw the equivalent to what's happened with school. And it was an earlier town hall, and it was a similar kind of question. And I compared the state report card. I said it's really the academic equivalent of Route 422. And if you look at what Route 422 did, as they, you know, turned it in from a, you know, country road into a 4-lane express highway, it was one more reason that it was easier to move further and further away from urban cores. And that's exactly what's happened with state report cards. The question specifically was, I still remember, is from Patrick O'Donnell, and he asked, you know, could we just publish data after 1 year of, you know, remote or hybrid or whatever this year ends up being? Could we just, you know, publish that data to really see how students are doing? And my answer would be the same tonight. That data has never been used for improvement. If that data was about improvement, we would see a much faster publication. We would see resources diverted because of those results. We certainly wouldn't see punitive measures like we've seen with state takeovers in either districts or threatening districts with state takeovers. We would see them actually aimed to say, what can we do better? Why is there this problem in this area? That's never been how that data has been used. It's always been about segregating, saying those are the haves, those are the have-nots, and boy, you better do everything you can to get away from those have-nots, just like Route 422 did when it started as a pathway to get faster into your outer suburbs.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This has just really been great thus far. And now we're going to open up our questions to our attendees and some of the questions that have been previously submitted.
Can I talk, Lisa, just one?
Sure.
It's around the question around the pandemic has forced us to rely on digital learning. How can equity be achieved? I did mention the federal dollars that are necessary to be infused into local communities. The other thing I also want to talk about is what I have seen nationally is that school districts have fared the best. I'm not saying it's the it's the 100% excellence in terms of transitioning over to digital learning, but schools need, and school districts need a backup plan. So for those districts where I've seen they had a backup plan, like what to do in the case of, you know, a natural disaster, for example. School districts learned after Katrina that schools can be shut down, students would be displaced. So schools absolutely need to get a backup plan. You know, somebody said to me recently, and I was like, oh, I never thought of it this way, is that there will never be another snow day called. When I inquired about that, it was because school districts will now have an opportunity to move to remote learning. So there's no excuse anymore for having the snow day. I'm not saying the person's thinking was right or wrong, but one of the things that I know internationally is that Singapore, Finland, Italy, I think it's Bulgaria and one other country are now, when they're transitioning more into face-to-face interactions with kids, again, you know, in a healthy and safe kind of way, they're also demonstrating to families that 1 or 2 days a month will be remote learning. So people don't get out of the habit of how do you make those connections with educators, and neither do educators get lost in the shuffle of, oh my gosh, what do I do to do a language arts assignment for grade 6 starting on Monday? So we have to rethink this possibility of what does digital learning look like, not just from an equity lens, but how do we make it more of the way that we go about learning, particularly when you think about if one of our big goals is to prepare kids for the next phase of post-secondary learning, a lot of that is taking place in largely organized and online classes. You know, I know several people are receiving master's and doctoral degrees online. Several freshman classes, very large, are now offering seminars online. So how do we get our kids transitioned into that? So we need these backup plans, and we need to figure out that technology is not going away or remote learning is not going away, but we have to define what its appropriate place is. And then how do we hold ourselves accountable for the results of that remote learning?
Yeah, can I jump in? Do you mind? Okay. It's interesting because this year, for the school year coming up, before the pandemic, we had already planned for all of our seniors on Friday to work remotely from their home, because we were preparing them for exactly what you said, what this looks like in college. Because in most college, I mean, most of my degrees, I was sitting in a classroom, but that's not reality for our scholars right now. So that's something we were behind in the time and behind in our thinking. But now we're forced to be prepared. And what you said earlier is so profound. We don't have to have a snow day anymore. We don't. This changes the game for us, especially if our families still have, when our families still have access to that device and they still have access to that internet. It's a golden opportunity for us to change the way that our thinking and the way we've done things. And I think for us, and I think other people can say this as well, our teachers' mindset have changed. You had a lot of teachers who were not prepared for online learning, and they've been teaching for a long time. And I've never seen so much enthusiasm than I've seen in the last couple of weeks of those teachers who, before they were like, I don't think I can do this, I'm ready to retire. Now it's like, oh my gosh, somebody stopped and helped me. I get it. This is nice. This is like me being a teacher starting all over again. And I think that that's something that has to be considered, and something that you hit on earlier as well. We also have to make sure we take the time for the social emotional well-being of our staff members, because there's going to be a great transition when we have to go back to school. Now, I know that's not something we have to focus on, but when it's time for everybody to go back to school, it's going to be a great transition, because we have teachers at home. Not only are they teaching the class, but they may have two types right next to them who have to help them with their work as well. And that's a stress that I don't think when we went to college to go to education, that's not something we ever thought about. And it's not something we're really thinking about right now.
This is sort of a tongue-in-cheek joke, but just given the fact that we engage so often in Zoom meetings, and before you got on, Justin, we were laughing about, you know, does somebody have a pair of shorts on right now, right? Just even the whole notion of like, what do you wear and how do you dress professionally again is going to have to be rethought, because people are, you know I have staff members who are like, oh God, I want to hang out at home and I want to do more remote work, because, and one of the reasons is because I want to wear sweats, or I want to wear my shorts, or I want to wear my flip-flops kind of thing. And I'm like, alrighty, can we revisit our mission and how we present ourselves to one another? So I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but a lot of this has come about with, you know, such a change in attitude, much more informal and much more connectivity.
I also want to say on this issue, particularly because this is the PTA, we have to give ourselves as a field permission to understand that we are going through a workforce retraining, not professional development.
Yes.
So professional development is the continued honing of our skills, the continued improving of our practice. But I'm a proud Clevelander now, but I'm originally from Toledo, and Jeep is the employer in Toledo. And when they put a new car on the line, they unapologetically brought the entire workforce in and said, we're going to show you how to build this car. And they didn't apologize for it in any way. And so we have to be equally unapologetic and supportive of our teachers and our parents in learning this new way together, not as a tweaking of what we used to do, but as a fundamental relearning of how we work, so that our kids and our families and our teachers have a high quality experience in this. And it is all of us together. We're all learning different ways. It's that family that has 2 kids at home while they're still trying to work. It's that mother or father or caregiver who's trying to figure out, what does remote learning look like for a preschooler? We've said in our district over and over and over and again, I'm not asking my parents to be great 6th grade math teachers. I'm asking them to be the great parent of a 6th grader. Do what you can and ask for support, because none of us have been here before. But it takes giving ourselves permission to be able then to reach out and access that support. If we don't give ourselves that permission, then we stay in the space of, I'm supposed to know what to do, and we don't actually end up helping each other either. So this is, again, a really unique opportunity to redefine the relationship between students, teachers, and parents. And just like Justin's 212 plan, our Wednesday is completely about checking in with kids and families and making sure that we know how they're doing and providing individual extra support for that kid that didn't show up Monday and Tuesday, and we got to figure out how to get him or her engaged. And I know I'm a little on a rant. I'll stop after this. People keep saying, well, what will you do for the kid that's not engaged? Teachers have always had that problem. It may be a different kid who's not engaged, but it's always been part of our challenge that there are some children who love school and are fully engaged, and there are other children that are really reluctant learners. And so we have to use those skills to figure out, how do we go and engage that reluctant learner, just like we always did. So this is going to create new partnerships and new expectations that, to my earlier point and to all of our earlier point, could define a better system at the end of the day.
Thank you. Now we're going to open it up to answer some questions. Our committee members are going to just field some questions quickly.
I have one. This is Heather. What are the measurable goals around equity and inclusion? And how will those goals be evaluated to know that efforts are having the intended positive impact? Anyone could answer.
I'll start. We have deliberately written down goals in health, safety, and well-being that we want to check in with our families and make sure that they're doing well, because we think that's a measure of equity. And it's things like our food plans working, is childcare in place, but it's also really asking, how are you doing? And do you have the support you need? We have goals around the quality of the educational experience, measuring not a report card measure of all children at the same place at the same time, but asking ourselves, is Justin making progress in his learning plan? Is Deb making progress in her learning plan? We have goals also in just kind of the overall operations and whether we're operating efficiently and using our resources well. So we've written them down and plan to measure them 2 times a quarter. We're also going to keep surveying our families and our caregivers. We've done 2 already. We have a 3rd planned because they'll tell us how we're doing and they'll tell us where those gaps are. And so we have a dashboard of the things that we think matter most to make this a better experience.
I would jump in too, because I think that a large part of how we were able to really take a look at what we were accomplishing or not accomplishing in the spring and really improving for the fall was really based on parent surveys. It was loud and clear that we could not, just post assignments on Monday and hope students completed them. It was very clear that we couldn't have this wide range of logins. So that's a piece of it. We're going to continue to survey students as well. What we did last year in terms of our Embrace All survey was, it was a lot about school climate. It was a lot about, do you feel connected? Do you feel there's an adult that you can go to? Do you feel that, if you're in a crisis mode, you know how to handle that? Do you like coming to school? You know, those types of really, how do you feel about things questions are really a critical piece of how, you know, students connect to school and really feel embraced. So we're going to continue to do that. We had a baseline from last year. And, you know, we look for improvement this year, certainly, you know, if we're able to come back, but, you know, even if not, we want to still maintain those same types of connections. But the third piece is really a traditional piece, and that's attendance. You know, we all battle, you know, in urban areas, you know, the chronic absenteeism, and chronic absenteeism is almost never about illness and almost always about engagement. So how are we moving the needle on making sure that kids are coming? And if we're not, you know, in a brick and mortar building, how are we moving the needle, making sure that they're actually logging in and completing assignments? So that's a traditional indicator, but I think it's one that's still very powerful to measure that connection.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'd add to that, and thank you, Charlie, for bringing that up too. One of the things I would add to that is to recognize, you know, there was a vast movement around this country within the last couple of years, maybe 3-4 years even, to have DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion committees and a DEI officer. And I've been moved by several people, including the work that Unica J has done, is like DEI is a component of the greater culture. And to focus on what is the culture in a school, what is the culture of, you know, the organization, and the modeling that has to occur. The three leaders with whom I'm sharing this panel, and I'm humbled to do so, are great role models for what is expected within a school district. You know, I always say what we offer to our kids tells them what it is that we value. When we offer opportunities for all kids, especially those historically underserved, to succeed, and we remove barriers, we look at opportunities for kids to engage in more rigorous coursework and not present opportunities for kids to say, I can't, you know, I'm going to exaggerate here. I can't take an AP BC calculus class because it required me to take algebra in second grade, right? That's an exaggeration, obviously. But the reality is that we have to tell kids that we care about them every single day with all of our policies. So when we have, and I haven't looked up anyone's mission statement for their school, so I apologize if this is going to be a negative on your mission statement. When I begin to see in mission statements, all kids to reach their potential, I'm like, who knows what a kid's potential happens to be? That'd be like me coming in and somebody saying to me, well, you've reached your potential, so you could stop learning or you could stop growing. Like every day I strive to be better. So how do we forget that? And how do we provide opportunities for all kids to have possibilities open for them and to have kids graduate from all of our schools with hope? That's what we ought to be giving kids, hope every single day. And if you look at some on the student agency piece, I think you were mentioning this, Charlie, in terms of the stat on the surveys for kids. If you look at Russ Quaglia work, QUAGLIA, I think from Aspirations Academy, his work around the world has demonstrated that the longer kids are in school, the less likely they are to be engaged in their work. It sometimes drops off at 30 and 27%. And this is not just about kids who are struggling academically. My husband has spent his entire life dealing in the field of gifted child education. The numbers of kids, gifted kids, who drop out of school is phenomenal because they could have done the work last year, because somebody will say to them, oh, you'll get it anyway. Or they feel like a failure, an A- is a failure when nobody's taken into consideration what is it that they want. So how do we create this personalized learning system? And we have an opportunity. I think, Eric, you were saying it so passionately, like this is a golden moment for us that we may hopefully never get again. We don't want another quarantining, but this is our moment to say, how do we create personalized learning systems that dismantle biases, systemic racism, and provide every kid with opportunities to be what they want to be, and then some. Because a 17-year-old doesn't always know whether or not, and he may financially or she may financially, for a number of reasons, not go on to college, but maybe when they're 26, they want to take that leap into a community college. So we can't say to kids, well, here's this grouping and you can go ahead and be plumbers. We need plumbers, and we do. But what if that kid wants to learn how to be a plumber and then perhaps own his own business? Do we give those kids the confidence and the skills to say, I have hope because Cleveland Metropolitan School District gave me that, because Parma did, because Youngstown gave me, that I can do this if I want to.
Well, and I want to connect this back to what Justin said earlier about educational poverty. There is such a pernicious language about kids and learning out there. Think about how many times you've heard learning loss, learning loss, learning loss. We did not lose the ability for children to learn. We lost time, and their learning stopped at some point, and we have to figure out what that unfinished learning is and finish it. But kids can still learn to read, they can still learn to do chemistry, they can still learn the arts, but if we approach it from learning loss, we immediately re-enter with the deficit.
Yes.
What didn't happen? If we approach it from unfinished learning, we immediately find where they are, what their assets are, and we move them forward. And so it's another place where we really have to ask ourselves very, very tough questions about what we continue to do and what we stop doing so that we enable the learning we want. I would argue that if we actually got to the personalized and mastery learning, that kids moved on their own pace, that gifted kid that could go really fast, that kid that needs lots more attention but is sitting in a class of 25 and can't get it, that we would actually close gaps for Black and brown children, for students with disabilities, for English language learners, for everyone, because kids would get what they need instead of getting pumped through an efficiency system. And that's why we got to take this as an opportunity to build better.
What guidance has the Ohio Department of Education provided to address equity issues identified by schools and districts so that it is consistent across the state and not a siloed approach?
I don't think anybody's going to touch that one. I'll talk about a quick discussion. I had a discussion with Paulo, and one of my big things about equity and looking at this is, if we're going to look at it from a equity standpoint, if we're going to talk about Black Lives Matters or anything like that, or we need to have more African American or more Latino studies, then it has to be tested, and that's something else that we have to do. And going back to testing is this: you have 4 people right here who are experts, and then other people. We should be the ones who are creating a system for that understanding. And we know that it's not testing, because a lot of somebody just said this, part of the reason our scholars struggle so much is because they can't connect this to what they want to do later on. Like she just said, if I'm a plumber, or let me use it from an African-American male term, I want to be a barber. You know what the #1 failure is for a barber? It's not that skills that they can cut hair, but it's managing the money. So now when you're in school and you talk to them about, hey, here's why you need to take this course on economics and math and this and that, because now when you get your business, you could be the greatest barber in the world, but if you can't manage your money, it's not going to help. And making those connections for our students is what we miss out on so often, because we're so focused on this test that's connected to ESSA, that's connected to money, that'll bring money into the district, but it's not helping our scholars. And it's not really helping us. It's actually making it worse, because our focus is not on our scholars. It's on how do we keep getting this funding that they can pull at any time. And until we have people who are educators, who went to school for education, making these decisions, we're going to keep spinning our wheels until we stand up and say something.
Do we have time for another, Lisa?
Hey, can I say something? I'm looking at a question from Amanda Rouse, and I just want to hit this about the liaison. So part of what we're doing, and thank you, Charlie, because you gave us Ava Yeager, who is phenomenal. But Ava works for us, and what part of what we did with some of our CARES Act money and some of our Title IV money as well, we've added another liaison to each school. For this remote learning. So if we have students, I've told my parents, your job is not to teach your students. Your job is to make sure those scholars log on, and that's attendance. That's just like you sending them to school. So if you're at home and you have to teach your scholar math, you need to give me a call, because some heads need to roll. But your job is to make sure that they're logging on, because I'm telling them, we're tracking truancy. So when I go through and I'm talking to my principals and I see people not logging on, it's an absence. And because we have a system in place where if you miss something, you can come back and we can see that you did that lesson. But they have to log on, because if they don't, this is going to be more detrimental than anybody ever thought. So, but That's our number one thing. And we're using that fund to have liaisons, making sure I'm not asking any of my liaisons to go into somebody's home, but their job is going to be go to that front porch and knock on the door and see what's going on. Because I think Deb addressed it earlier as well. The abuse is up 120%. So that means we have to have some caring adults in our district who are going to visit our kids. So I just wanted to address that because I saw the question there.
Yeah. One piece to that, and I would ask the parent liaisons too to do this, and the PTA, PTOs as well. You know, I go back to this equity as a verb kind of thing. I have never heard an adult say, you know, I don't care about this equity stuff. I don't care about all kids learning. Most people will say, yeah, I really care. The problem is they choose not to act upon their caring. And so I think one of the greatest advocacies that a parent liaison could do is to hold folks in the community accountable and say, we're in this together. So how do we act upon our caring to be sure that every kid has a possibility of of being very successful post-secondary high school? Every kid. Because it's a cost back to that community when kids aren't successful. And it rails against me when I see school districts across this country say, celebrate, yay, I have a 97% graduation rate. Because there is no celebration if your kid's in the 3% not graduating. So if you can hold all of us accountable to act upon our caring, it goes to, I think Charlie said earlier, we don't celebrate enough. We've got to create these narratives and stories about communities and partnerships and individual leaders, all the things that go into making a really extraordinary world for the future of our country.
And it goes back to something that Eric said earlier. We don't pay attention. We're focused on grades, GPAs, grades, and Carnegie units and different things like that. But if you go and you really do your research, the number one indicator of college success is a student's GPA, not what school district they went to and got the GPA. So we're so focused on these tests. And if you really pay attention, look at Harvard, look at Cornell, look at MIT. They're not even looking at ACT scores anymore or anything like that. They're looking at the students' rank in their GPA because that's going to equal success. Because some of our smartest kids aren't coming to school because they're not challenged. Look at your attendance numbers. It's not the kids who have all D's who are not coming to school. It's the kids who have all A's and they walk in the classroom and take a test and they get 100%. So that's the fault of the educational system. It's not the fault of the child. So we have to fix that as well. I'm sorry, Charlie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say too, I mean, part of this is how we repurpose, right? I mean, we all have, you know, and let's be honest, I mean, there's folks in our building who are dedicated toward, you know, restorative practices, and we probably won't really have a whole need for, you know, that type of engagement with students, given that for the most part, at least while we're remote, you know, we can't see too many, you know, violent interactions or harassment, at least not that, you know, we would see and reported to us by teachers. So how do we repurpose those people to do exactly what Amanda Rouse was talking about in terms of the home liaisons, to make sure that we do have the available personnel? They still are on the payroll. Let's make sure that they are wrapping around students to get them anything they possibly need, which still really is the real definition of equity, right? Can we give every student everything they need to make sure that, as Deb says, not just reach their potential, but have hope for something more, have the ability for something more, have a belief that they can be more. And that's, I think, the challenge that all of us are looking at. How can we mobilize those resources in a very different way?
All right. So we're going to wrap it up, I think. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much to our panelists tonight for what a great panel discussion this was tonight. Thank you so much. We appreciate your leadership and your willingness to share your insight, information, and to answer questions from parents about education equity gap, and also what equity truly looks like. Now more than ever, our schools need the support and partnership of our parents to navigate these difficult times. And panelists, parents should be included when important decisions are being made about how to measure student learning, and also to support their students' academic needs. As our schools reopen, one question should be answered is how can we better support our children, our families, and our school community? PTA can help schools host a meaningful conversation virtually with school leaders and parents with a new toolkit from PTA. The PTA Community Conversation Toolkit provides step-by-step directions for hosting a PTA community conversation around school reopening and other topics of importance, like tonight's topic, with your family. Please take a moment after the town hall ends to complete our exit survey, and then to show our appreciation, you'll be entered into a drawing to win one of 3 Amazon gift cards. And if your PTA or council is interested in more information about the toolkit and our incentive opportunity, please be sure to confirm your interest in the exit survey. Again, everybody, thank you so much for your time. To our panelists, thank you again. Please stay healthy and safe as our schools open up. And thank you for all your hard work as you work to get your schools reopened. Thank you so much.